Good morning. This is Dr. McDaniel at GYN Corner. I'm a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist in New York City, and I'm bringing to you all things health-related for women. Today's Saturday. It's December 28th today, and we have an extremely foggy day. It's a little after 8 in the morning. And it's very, very foggy. I'll do a turnaround. You can see behind me, it's pretty much nothing to see. It's la brumeuse. La brumeuse. C'est foggy en français, in French. C'est, my kids and I speak French together, and reminds me of when they were little. We used to watch Dora. Yes, that's we. We all used to watch, except my husband, myself, and the kids used to watch Dora. And for some reason on Dora, we used to watch Dora in French. For some reason on Dora, they were always going over lagoons and lakes with lots of fog. So whenever it's really foggy, I always think of our Dora cartoons. And they'd be singing about the fog. Brumeuse, brumeuse, la brume, la brume. So it's very funny. Nostalgie, because my oldest two kids are 14 and 13, so that was a good 10 years ago. We used to watch Dora in the mornings. Dora. Anyways, that's my walk down memory lane, so let's see. That's really crazy foggy today. I'm doing the Saturday series on pregnancy, labor and delivery. So this is the fourth installment. The first one I spoke about mucus plug. Second one was early labor or false labor. Third one was active labor. And today I'm going to go off track a bit. I was trying to decide, was I going to go into labor or speak a little more on active labor. And I think what I'll do is speak on dysfunctional active labor. So active labor that doesn't live up to its name. It stops. It's not actually active. So I'm going to speak on active labor when it goes wrong. So active labor is usually starts around 3 centimeters for whatever reason. Usually starts around 3 centimeters, and basically it's when the contractions are regular and strong enough to dilate the cervix approximately 1 centimeter per hour. And it's usually a little more than that. So we say the minimum is 1 centimeter an hour, but realistically, if she's in active labor, it's more like 2 to 3 centimeters an hour. And fully dilated is 10 centimeters, in case people didn't know that. So she should go from 3 to 10 at the most. It should take 7 hours, but that's really not normal. On average, it would take like 4 hours. I think for my kids, all of them, I think the longest it took me my longest labor was 5 hours. So there you go. From 0 to 10 was 5 hours. My shortest labor was about 3. The longest was 5. So that shows you what normal really is. Normal's really quick. So say someone is, and usually the woman should be contracting every 1 to 3, every 1 minute would be quick. So every 2 to 3 minutes. And we usually have a tachometer on her belly, and that's measuring the strength of her contractions. And it should be at least 60 units, which is about 60 millimeters mercury. So the strength should be about 60, and it should be regular, strong contractions. And you can just gauge the contractions because she's not able to socialize with the contractions. She has to stop. She can't talk. She can't smile. She has to really focus on breathing, because if she doesn't focus on breathing, she's going to start writhing and moaning and screaming, which is not helpful. So they're going to be regular contractions that are actively dilating the cervix. Now, say someone is 4 to 5 centimeters. 2 hours later, you check them, you expect them to be almost 10 or fully. You check them and they're just a loose 5. That's not normal. 2 hours later, she should be a lot further along. So loose 5 is already telling you that the contractions are either not adequate or there's an obstruction. So we call it cephalopelvic disproportion, or CPD, which means cephalo, the head, pelvic, obviously the mother's pelvis, aren't working together well. So the head's too big for her pelvic inlet. So the head has to drop. Everybody knows that. If the head doesn't drop, it's not going to help ram open the cervix, so the dilatation is just going to sit there. So if her pelvic inlet is too narrow, the head's just going to stay high. Sorry, there's so much fog out here. I'm looking. I thought I heard a car coming down the driveway. Like, I don't need to be out here in the middle of the driveway because they will not see me to the last minute. So if the cervix is not adequately dilated, then that's telling us that there's a problem with either the strength of the contractions or that the head's just not going to drop. It doesn't matter how strong the contractions are, it's not going to happen. So in that case, then what we will usually do is, if her water's not already broken, we'll rupture the membranes. And you have an option. You can either rupture the membranes to see if rupturing the membranes, it helps release hormones or prostaglandins, which can help strengthen the contractions. And you can leave it be, check her in another hour or two. Or what I used to do is rupture the membranes and place an internal pressure catheter in the uterus. And that internal uterine pressure catheter will give us a very specific and accurate strength of the contractions. So what I used to do is place the catheter in and watch for about 10 to 12 minutes to see what kind of strength we're actually getting with the specific catheter. And if it doesn't show that we have adequately strong and regular contractions, then I would help the labor out. We call it augment the labor. I would start Pitocin, which is a hormone that the body naturally produces to cause contractions of the uterus. We have synthetic Pitocin. So when we administer IV Pitocin into the patient's bloodstream, what that does is it helps to induce or to cause stronger and more deliberate regular contractions. So we can increase the strength and the regularity of the contractions by adding Pitocin to the Pitocin that her body is already producing. So I would rupture the membranes, place the catheter, watch it for the monitor for 10 to 12 minutes. If they're not looking perfect, I'd add Pitocin. You really don't want to waste time. You don't want to waste time when she's in labor and exhausting the baby. And you don't want to waste time once the membranes are ruptured, because now the intrauterine environment is no longer sterile. It's open to tons of bacteria, vaginal, skin. Every time you examine the patient, you're dragging, even though we use sterile gloves, it doesn't matter. We're still dragging bacteria from the vagina into the uterine cavity and increasing the risk of infection. So you try to limit the number of exams you're doing. That's why you really don't want to check them every hour. You want to give them 2 to 3 hours. But if nothing's happening, you've lost 2 to 3 hours in time. So that's why I used to just immediately put the catheter in, not rupture the membrane, see if something happens, and then after another hour or two, nothing happens. Now I'm putting the catheter. So I never did that. So if it looks like the labor is slowing down, it's not following our rules of active labor, which we call labor curve, then I would rupture the membranes to help release natural hormones or prostaglandins, which will give us some help with the contraction situation. I'd immediately place an intrauterine pressure catheter, watch the strength of the contractions and the pattern for a good 10 to 12 minutes, augment with Pitocin, and aggressively increase the Pitocin so that we're getting adequately frequent contractions and adequately strong contractions within 45 to 60 minute time frame, because at this point time is now of the essence. And if I checked her 2 hours later, I know realistically she should be fully dilated. She was 5, maybe she'll be 9, but she was 5, and then with 2 hours of strong regular contractions, she should be 8 to 10. If I check her 2 hours later and she's only 6, then I know it's not happening. Now that didn't happen often for me. It happened less than 15% of the time. And what I would do, I would discuss with the patient. She's only 6. After another 2 hours of strong contractions, I'd give her the recommendation for a C-section, because we have CPD, which is the head is not dropping in the face of regular, strong, adequate contractions for over 2 hours. So I would tell her I think she's going to need a C-section, but we'd give her 2 more hours just to see if things caught up. If I check her in another 2 hours and now she's only 6 to 7, it's time to call it, because you don't want a situation where you're pretty much just forcing the head to mold, because the head of the baby is malleable. It can mold a bit to the shape of the pelvis. You don't want to really force that head to mold. So a labor that from 4 centimeters should have been delivered within 3 hours. 3 hours later, you're only at 5 to 6. And then 9 hours later, you're fully dilated. That's not a good scene. And what's going to usually happen is you're going to have stuck shoulders. So I'm going to stop right there today. This is like a soap opera. We've stopped on a cliffhanger, stuck shoulders. So I'm going to stop right here today on active labor when things go wrong. Ooh, I'm in the shadow here because of the fogging. And I'll come back on the next Saturday to continue problems during active labor. So I hope that's been interesting, helpful information. This is Dr. McDaniel at GYN Corner. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe and follow buttons. Check us out on YouTube. It's also GYN Corner. Check us out on our podcasts, Podcast Addict, Apple, Google, Spotify, the usual Anchor, the usual haunts. And please leave suggestions and reviews, the whole kit and caboodle. Coming from the horse farm, Baymar Horse Farms here in New Jersey. Today it's Saturday. Have a great rest of your day.